Ethan Langford had everything a man could dream of: money, power, and a life filled with luxury. From the outside, he appeared to be the perfect example of success. People admired him, envied his wealth, and whispered about his latest business deals. But what truly made him feel like a winner wasn't just his empire. It was Isabella, his beautiful, charming wife, who turned heads wherever she went. Isabella had been a well-known model before marrying Ethan. With her elegant features and graceful presence, she was the kind of woman people couldn't help but admire. Ethan had pursued her with grand gestures, expensive gifts, romantic vacations, and promises of a dream life together. At first, she had been swept away by his charm. Who wouldn't be? He made her feel special, like she was the only woman in the world. Their wedding was a grand event, covered by magazines and attended by the elite. To everyone watching, it seemed like a fairy tale. A wealthy businessman and a stunning model. What could go wrong? But behind the scenes, things were different. Ethan was not just a loving husband. He was a man obsessed with control. In the beginning, Isabella didn't notice the small changes. Ethan would suggest what she should wear, claiming certain dresses suited her better. He would gently advise her on how to speak in public, telling her which words made her sound more elegant. She saw these as signs of care, little ways he wanted her to be the best version of herself. But over time, his suggestions became rules, and his care felt more like control. Ethan took pride in showing off Isabella. Whenever they attended parties or events, he loved how people admired her. He enjoyed hearing compliments about her beauty as if they were compliments about him. She became a symbol of his success, proof that he had the best of everything. The way people looked at her made him feel powerful. As time passed, Isabella started to feel like she was losing herself. She was no longer the free-spirited woman who had dreams and ambitions. Her life revolved around Ethan's expectations. She wasn't allowed to work, even though she had once loved her career. He told her she didn't need to because he could provide everything. She wasn't encouraged to have close friends, as Ethan believed they might bring unnecessary distractions. Slowly, her world shrank. The mansion, which once felt like a dream home, became more like a golden cage. The luxurious vacations were just carefully planned trips where she had to look perfect at all times. The expensive gifts were just reminders that her role was to be admired, not to be heard. But the real shock came when Ethan did something that made Isabella realize how little he saw her as a person. He built a special glass room in their house where she was supposed to sit and look beautiful when guests arrived. She wasn't expected to talk much, just to smile and be admired. She had become nothing more than a trophy, a prize he had won and placed on display. At first, she played along, believing it was temporary. But deep down, something inside her was changing. She was starting to realize that this was not the life she had dreamed of. And soon, something would happen that no one, not even Ethan, could have expected. Isabella had always imagined marriage as a partnership where love and respect went hand in hand. But as time passed, she realized that in Ethan's world, she was not a partner. She was a possession. He had won her over with charm and grand gestures, but now she felt like nothing more than a beautiful decoration in his perfect life. At first, she tried to convince herself that this was normal. Ethan was a successful man, and maybe this was just his way of showing love. He always wanted her to look her best, to present herself with grace and elegance. He chose her clothes, her jewelry, even the way she styled her hair. "You look perfect like this," he would say with a satisfied smile. And for a while, she believed him. But soon, the choices weren't hers anymore. If she wanted to wear something different, he would frown and shake his head. If she expressed an opinion at a dinner party, he would gently squeeze her hand under the table, a silent reminder to stay quiet. If she wanted to meet old friends, he would find a reason to say no. "They don't understand our lifestyle," he would tell her. "They'll only fill your head with unnecessary thoughts." Isabella started to feel alone, even when surrounded by people. She attended glamorous events, standing beside Ethan like the perfect wife. People admired her beauty, but no one ever asked what she thought or how she felt. She began to notice how little she spoke in conversations. She was there to be seen, not heard. The mansion, once filled with excitement, now felt cold and empty. She had no responsibilities, no purpose beyond looking perfect. Ethan provided everything: money, luxury, security, but he had taken away the one thing she truly needed: freedom. She wasn't allowed to work, even though she had once loved modeling. "You don't need to," he would say. "Why stress yourself when I can give you everything?" Days turned into months, and Isabella felt like a shadow of the woman she used to be. She would wake up in the morning, already knowing what her day would look like: breakfast with Ethan, a few hours of beauty treatments, an afternoon of silence in their grand home, and an evening at a party where she would once again be the perfect wife. One evening, as she stood in front of the large mirror in her dressing room, she stared at her reflection. She looked flawless, just as Ethan liked. But the woman in the mirror felt like a stranger. Where was the Isabella who once laughed without worry? The Isabella who had dreams of her own? Something inside her stirred. She didn't know what it was yet, but she could feel it. An urge, a whisper telling her that this was not the life she wanted. She had been silent for too long. And soon, something was going to change. One afternoon, Ethan walked into the living room with a proud smile on his face. "I have a surprise for you," he said, taking Isabella's hand and leading her through the house. She followed him down a long hallway, her heart beating a little faster. Ethan's surprises were always extravagant: expensive jewelry, designer dresses, luxury trips. But this time, something felt different. When they reached the end of the hallway, Ethan stopped in front of a large wooden door. With a dramatic gesture, he pushed it open, revealing a brand new glass room inside. It was beautifully decorated with elegant furniture, soft lighting, and a perfect view of the garden. At first, Isabella was confused. "This," Ethan said proudly, "is your special space." She looked around, trying to understand what he meant. The walls were made of thick glass, allowing anyone outside to see in. There was a luxurious chair placed in the center, surrounded by decorative lights. It looked like something out of a museum, a display, not a living space. Ethan walked over to the chair and gestured for her to sit. "From now on, when we have guests, you can stay here. Everyone will admire how beautiful you are." A strange feeling crept into Isabella's heart. "You want me to sit here?" she asked slowly. "Yes," Ethan said, his eyes shining with excitement. "People are always asking about you. Now they can see you like a work of art. You don't even have to worry about talking too much. Just be here, looking perfect." For a moment, Isabella couldn't speak. She had always felt like a trophy, but now Ethan had turned that feeling into something real. He had built her a place where she was meant to be seen and admired. Nothing more. She forced a small smile, hiding the storm of emotions inside her. "It's interesting," she said softly. Ethan took her hands. "I knew you'd love it. You're my greatest treasure, Isabella. I want the world to see how lucky I am." That night, she sat alone in their bedroom, staring at the ceiling. Her mind kept replaying Ethan's words. "My greatest treasure." A treasure wasn't a person. It was an object, something to be owned. She had been feeling trapped for months, but now, for the first time, she saw the truth clearly. Ethan didn't love her. He loved the idea of her. She touched the cool silk of her nightgown and looked around the massive room filled with expensive furniture, paintings, and chandeliers. It was all beautiful, but it wasn't hers. None of it was. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a different life. A life where she made her own choices. A life where she wasn't on display. Something inside her had changed. She wasn't sure what she would do yet, but one thing was clear: she couldn't live like this forever. Isabella sat by the window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass. Outside, the garden looked peaceful, untouched by the storm brewing inside her heart. She had spent years playing the role of the perfect wife, smiling when expected, dressing up for every event, and staying silent when it mattered most. But after Ethan's latest gift, something inside her had shifted. She could no longer ignore the truth. She was not living. She was just existing. She started paying closer attention to Ethan's behavior. He loved control, but his greatest weakness was his obsession with his image. He cared deeply about how people saw him. His reputation mattered more than anything. Isabella knew that as long as she played the role of the obedient wife, he would never suspect anything. She needed a plan. For the first time in years, she began doing something for herself. When Ethan was away on business trips, she used the time to explore things that had once made her happy. She found an old notebook in her dresser and started writing down her thoughts. At first, it felt strange. After years of keeping quiet, she wasn't even sure what she wanted to say. But slowly, the words came. She wrote about her dreams, the person she used to be before she became Ethan's trophy. One evening, while Ethan was out at a late-night business dinner, Isabella sat in the study and turned on his laptop. She had never been allowed to handle finances. Ethan always told her there was no need. But now she wanted to see for herself. As she clicked through files and accounts, she realized something important. Ethan had several hidden investments, and one of them was in her name. It was a small fortune, probably something he had set up for tax purposes, never expecting her to notice. But now that she knew about it, she had power. Over the next few weeks, Isabella carefully moved small amounts of money into a private account. Nothing too noticeable, just enough to secure her future. She also began researching legal help, learning about her rights. She was no longer just waiting for things to change. She was taking control. But she had to be careful. Ethan was used to having things his way, and if he sensed she was slipping away, he would tighten his grip. So Isabella played her role perfectly. She smiled at parties, wore the dresses he picked, and sat in the glass room whenever guests came over. To everyone else, she was still the perfect wife. But inside, she was stronger than ever. She didn't know exactly when or how she would leave, but she knew one thing for sure. Her days as Ethan's trophy were coming to an end. And soon, the world would see the truth. The grand ballroom was filled with laughter, music, and the soft clinking of glasses. Another one of Ethan's high-profile parties was in full swing. Businessmen, celebrities, and socialites moved through the lavish space, exchanging smiles and polite conversations. Everything looked perfect, just as Ethan liked it. And as always, Isabella was there, standing beside him like a flawless ornament. Dressed in a stunning gown, her hair styled to perfection, she played her role effortlessly. Guests admired her, whispered about her beauty, and complimented Ethan for being a lucky man. But tonight was different. Tonight, Isabella was not just playing along. She was watching, observing, and waiting for the right moment. Ethan, as usual, basked in the attention. He was in deep conversation with a group of influential businessmen, laughing and shaking hands, his confidence unshaken. He believed he had everything under control. Isabella slowly reached for a crystal glass filled with champagne. The soft golden liquid sparkled under the chandelier lights. She held it delicately, feeling its weight in her hand. Then, with a steady breath, she tightened her grip and let it slip from her fingers. The glass shattered against the marble floor, the sound cutting through the music and chatter. For a moment, there was complete silence. All eyes turned toward her. Ethan's smile froze. His expression darkened as he stepped toward her. "Isabella," he said through clenched teeth, his voice calm but firm, "are you all right?" But instead of answering, Isabella bent down, picked up a broken piece of glass, and studied it for a moment. Then she looked up and met his eyes, really met them, for the first time in years. "I'm fine," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I just realized something." Ethan's jaw tightened. He hated being embarrassed in public. But before he could say anything, Isabella turned to the guests. "Did you know? She said with a soft smile that when glass breaks, it can never be put back the same way again. A few people chuckled politely, unsure of where this was going. Ethan placed a firm hand on her arm, trying to guide her away. But she didn't move. She turned back to him and whispered, just loud enough for only him to hear, "And neither can I." Ethan stiffened. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. He could sense that something had changed, but he didn't know what. Isabella, his perfect, obedient wife, had just slipped from his grasp, and he hadn't even realized it was happening. She excused herself with grace, walking away from the party, leaving Ethan standing there with the broken glass at his feet. For years, she had been silent. But tonight, she had spoken without saying much at all. And soon, everyone would understand what that moment truly meant. That night, Isabella lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The shattered glass, the looks from the guests, and the moment she met Ethan's eyes played over and over in her mind. Something had shifted. She had felt it. And so had he. Ethan had not said a word to her after the party. Usually, he would have been furious if she embarrassed him in public. But this time, he had simply watched her in silence, as if trying to understand what was happening. The next morning, Isabella woke up earlier than usual. She got dressed in a simple outfit, nothing extravagant, nothing that screamed perfect wife. As she stepped downstairs, she saw Ethan sitting in the dining room, sipping his morning coffee. He looked up, his sharp eyes studying her carefully. "You caused quite a scene last night," he finally said. She met his gaze, calm and unshaken. It was just a glass. His lips pressed into a thin line. "It wasn't just about the glass, Isabella. You were trying to say something." She tilted her head slightly. "Did I?" For the first time, Ethan looked unsettled. He wasn't used to her being like this. He was used to controlling the conversation, setting the rules. But now, there was something in her eyes he couldn't quite grasp. He put down his cup and leaned forward. "Whatever is going on, I hope you remember how much I've given you." His voice was smooth, almost kind, but she knew it was a warning. "This life, this luxury, it's all because of me." Isabella smiled slightly. "I haven't forgotten." But deep inside, she knew she didn't care anymore. The wealth, the luxury, the grand house, it all felt empty. It was a world built by Ethan, and she no longer wanted to be a part of it. Over the next few days, she moved carefully. She continued transferring small amounts of money into her private account. She contacted a lawyer in secret, learning what her options were. And most importantly, she prepared for the moment when she would walk away. One afternoon, while Ethan was out, she sat in the glass room, the place he had built for her to be admired like a trophy. She looked around at the expensive furniture, the designer decor, the perfect arrangement of flowers. Everything was in its place, except for one thing, her. Because she wasn't meant to be here. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a key to a small apartment she had rented in secret, a place where she could start over, a place where she could be herself. As she held the key in her hand, a deep sense of peace washed over her. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't waiting for someone to save her. She was saving herself. And soon, Ethan would realize that the woman he thought he owned was already gone. The morning air was crisp as Isabella stepped outside for the first time in years without feeling washed. She wore a simple coat, her hair loose, and carried nothing but a small handbag. Everything she needed was already prepared: documents, money, a new place to stay. She had planned every detail carefully. Ethan was away on a business trip, and the staff in the house never questioned her movements. To them, she was just following her usual routine. But this time, she wasn't coming back. As she walked toward the car she had rented in secret, her heart pounded in her chest. Not with fear, but with something new. Excitement. Freedom was just a few steps away. She got into the car, turned the key, and drove out of the mansion gates without looking back. For the first time in years, she felt weightless. No schedule to follow, no perfect image to maintain, no silent expectations to meet. The city stretched before her, filled with endless possibilities. She arrived at the small apartment she had rented weeks ago. It wasn't grand like Ethan's mansion, but it felt more like home than anything else ever had. The walls were plain, the furniture simple, but everything inside belonged to her. She took a deep breath, savoring the moment. This was her life now. That evening, she sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker. She thought about what would happen when Ethan found out. He would be furious. He would try to find her, demand answers, maybe even try to convince her to come back. But she wouldn't. Because this wasn't just about leaving Ethan. It was about finding herself again. She had spent years living for someone else, being molded into an image of perfection that was never truly hers. Now she had the chance to be who she wanted to be. Her phone buzzed on the table. She knew who it was before even looking. Ethan. She stared at the screen for a moment before pressing ignore. He would realize soon enough. The Isabella he thought he owned was gone, and she was never coming back. Ethan paced back and forth in his grand mansion, his jaw clenched, his phone gripped tightly in his hand. He had called Isabella multiple times, but she never answered. His perfect wife, his beautiful, obedient trophy, had disappeared without a trace. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Maybe she had gone on a short trip. Maybe she was upset about something and needed space. But as hours turned into days, he realized the truth. She had left him. It was something he had never imagined. He had given her everything. Wealth, luxury, status. What more could she possibly want? The thought of her walking away from it all made his chest burn with frustration. He tried to find her. He called people, sent messages, checked her usual places. But Isabella had been careful. There was no trace of her. It was as if she had simply vanished. Meanwhile, in her small apartment, Isabella felt lighter than she ever had before. Each day, she rediscovered small joys, walking in the park without worrying about how she looked, drinking coffee at a quiet cafe without someone watching her every move, reading a book just because she wanted to. For the first time in years, she was making choices for herself. She found a job at a small boutique, something simple but meaningful. She met new people, people who saw her not as Ethan's wife, but as Isabella, just Isabella. And she loved it. One evening, as she sat in her apartment, her phone buzzed again. Another message from Ethan. "Come back. Let's talk." She stared at the words for a long time before typing a simple response. No. There was nothing more to say. Ethan could never understand why she left, because he had never truly seen her as a person, only as a prize. And she refused to live in a world where she was nothing more than a decoration. She put the phone down, walked to her window, and looked out at the city. The world was big, full of possibilities, and for the first time, she was free to explore it. A smile spread across her face. Her story wasn't over. It was just beginning.